here. Let me see if the sound's working. Hang on. Yep. Looks all right. All right. So, just going to jump right in. Didn't play yesterday, so there's no hands to review. So we're going to go to the next section, preflop strategy, all stack sizes. Looks like there's 4 parts to this. Stack depth, preflop bet sizing, preflop range, and position. I'm going to try to get through this whole 4-part section today, hopefully. But I know these are pretty dense, so we'll see. Maybe it'll be faster than I remember.
Congrats on making it through the introductory sections of this masterclass. Now we are ready to get into the nitty-gritty and discuss playing before the flop. First things first, stack depth is very, 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 very important. You have to learn how to play all stack sizes well if you want to succeed in poker tournaments. There are many world-class deep stacked cash game players who crush the early stages of tournaments, but then they struggle when they get medium or shallow stacked and inevitably don't actually win all that much money from poker tournaments. Alternatively, there are many strong online players who are really good at playing shallow stack tournaments, which is often what you're playing when you're playing small to medium buy-ins. But when they start to move up to the higher levels, where you do have to play deep stacked poker to some extent, especially in the early stages, they struggle as well. So it's very important that you are keenly aware of how to play all of the various stack sizes, and the common stack sizes will be explained in this masterclass. Realize that you are always playing the effective stack, which means the shortest stack among the stacks present.
Now I'm going to break in there. This is an important concept that I didn't get until the second time I went through this masterclass. Saying you're always playing the shortest stack. So if you have 60 blinds and you're on the button and a player in the cutoff raises to 20 blinds, you are now playing a 20 big blind stack if you choose to enter this pot. Your stack size doesn't matter, okay? So how would you play a 20 big blind stack versus an open from the cutoff with an equal stack is the question. So you'll see it happen a lot in tournaments, and it's one of the more common, easily adaptable moves that I've adopted that I kind of haven't seen anybody talk about, but it's worked pretty perfectly for me. Since I'm playing that effective stack, I just imagine that I have that stack. So if I have 60 blinds and there's a player who has 20 blinds over here, well, that's a bad example. If I have 40 blinds and there's a player who has 20 blinds over here, and I have King Jack suited, okay? Now, depending on a couple other factors, like how big the stacks are he's raising into, but let's say I have, 30, and the guy next to me has 30, and another guy has, 25, and the big blind has 30. If I have King Queen offsuit, I could bring up the charts, but I won't. On a 20 big blind stack on the button facing an open, you're supposed to jam it, okay? So because I have 30 or 35 or 40 blinds, it's kind of pointless to 3-bet less than that, okay? So I'm just going to jam the 40 blinds in. And I find that it has the same success rate of stealing as 20 big blinds does, which is exactly what I want. Now, if I have a monster hand, obviously I'm going to re-raise and try to get this player's all in, but I'm saying about situations where I would be jamming the same effective stack, I just go ahead and do it with a bigger stack because it's fine. Now, when you get into 60 big blind stacks, you're playing a bit different game, but you can re-raise that player all in for 20 big blinds and only have a third of your stack in. The players behind you then know that you're not folding, so it's essentially the same thing. So that's the concept of playing the effective stack that I don't think gets talked about enough, is that you really have to imagine your stack being the same. There is no chart for when you have 60 big blinds. There's a chart for when you have 60 big blinds and get raised from the cutoff, what do you do? There's not a chart for when you have 60 blinds and the cutoff with 20 big blinds raises, what do you do? Because it doesn't matter. It just becomes you both have 20 big blinds. Guy in the cutoff raises. What do you do on the button? Boom, with King Queen, right? So that's the thing to keep in mind about playing the effective stack size that I didn't realize the first time around, was how to compensate for stack difference when I have more.
Right? So if you have 100 big blinds and everybody else has 20 big blinds, you're essentially playing a 20 big blind stack, adjusting for the fact that you may be able to apply pressure to the 20 big blind stacks because you cannot go broke in any individual hand, but they can. Realize that hand values change as stack sizes change. For example, losing a 20 big blind pot with top pair second kicker isn't all that big of a deal. In fact, it's, well, quite normal. However, losing a 250 big blind pot with top pair second kicker is usually a pretty big mistake unless your opponent is a lunatic.
Kind of an interesting concept that doesn't get elaborated on enough is that when you think about stack sizes, the reason why you hear cliches like the stacks play deeper at this blind level, or when you're playing this deep and you get all the money in, somebody's really got to have it. Well, that's because you can think about it in terms of money, right? If you're in a cash game, a 1-2 cash game, and you have 20 blinds, right? That's $40. And you're in a pot with king, queen, you raised, somebody called, and it comes off king, 4 deuce, and you get all the money in on the flop. Obviously, that's a great spot for you because your one pair plays better, and you probably have a 2-to-1 stack to pot ratio, so getting it in on the flop is really, really good for your range because you're going to be up against a worse pair or even some kind of funky draw. Rarely you're going to be up against a set, but it will happen. But that's a situation where you're dying to get the money in. Now, if you have 100 blinds, right, playing king, queen, and you make that raise get called and the flop comes off king, 4 deuce, and you bet at the pot and get raised, and you re-raise, and they jam on you, how much do you like your king, queen now? You kind of don't like it a lot. So that's why you want to break down the difference between sizes and when you're willing to get the money in. That'll also come into a factor of hands that sometimes at an 80 big blind stack, you're going to fold in first position, versus when you have 20 big blinds, you're going to limp it or you're going to raise it every time because your hand plays better for one pair. Hands that play better for one pair do better on shorter stacks. Hands that play better for straights, flushes, 2 pairs, things like that play better on big stacks because there is more to win. You need a stronger hand.
Also, you're going to find that specific pre-flop hands change value. Like ace-jack offsuit's pretty great when you have 20 big blinds. So if your opponent wants to get it in most scenarios, it's usually just okay. But if you're playing 100 big blinds deep or even 50 big blinds deep, ace-jack offsuit is not nearly as good because you're going to be dominated way more often. So realize that hands change value as stack depths change. I'm going to give you a few quick tips for deep stacked play versus shallow stacked play, and then we're going to get into how to play each specific stack size. But these themes are going to persist as we go through all of the various ways to handle playing different stack depths. So when we are playing deep stack, it's important to realize that if your opponent wants to put a lot of money in the pot, either pre-flop or after the flop, that you need a really good hand to continue. So hands with large implied odds again are the hands that are probably not behind now, but if they do make a good hand, it's going to be a really good hand. These hands go way up in value whenever you are playing deep stack. These are going to be suited aces, suited connectors, small pairs, right? These are hands you want to see the flop with, and then you want to make a really good post-flop hand, and then you can be pretty happy getting your money in. And alternatively, the hands that lack implied odds, these are going to be the big unsuited hands like ace-jack offsuit, and unimproved pocket pairs like pocket jacks on a queen 7-6 4-2 board. These are going to be difficult to play, and that's because if a lot of money goes in, they're usually not in great shape, right? So realize that hands like top pair marginal kicker are, well, exactly that. They are marginal, right? So you want to make sure that you're keeping the pot manageable whenever you do have one of those medium strength hands. All right, so when we are...
So now here's something to remember in that scenario is that there are times when you're going to play those marginal made hands like they're the nuts, and that's based on your stack size. I think I already covered that, but like he was saying, top pair with the king queen, you're going to want to just get it in with 20 big blinds, whereas you're not going to come anywhere close to that with 55, 60 big blinds, somewhere there. I could see situations getting it in with 50 big blinds top pair, but it's usually not great. It kind of depends heavily on the player and the board texture. I will say that factors into when you can bluff, because players know these things. So this is why the bet works, where you raise pre-flop, you bet the flop, you bet the turn, and you jam the river. That's why that betting structure works quite often, is because if you can deduce that your opponent has a marginal hand, they know they're not supposed to get all that money in. So then it's just a matter of what's their tolerance level. So you just try to assess their tolerance level and figure, well, they'll call this much, and then bet a little bit more. And then, once you've broken that, you're good. And that's why geometric betting comes into play of, raising, betting throughout the hands so that on the river you have a 1-to-1 stack to pot ratio, and jamming is best, where there is no other bet.
You're playing shallow stacked, it's kind of the opposite. You're going to find that pairs and big cards become quite powerful. Like if you have 12 big blinds and ace-9 offsuit, it's a pretty good hand. You're probably okay getting your money in. Whenever someone raises, one of your most powerful plays, which we will be discussing in depth, is to just go all in over the pre-flop raise. If someone raises and you have 20 big blinds, it's okay to not even have a calling range. You may just opt to go all in with every hand that you plan on playing.
When I first heard that concept, which I believe was in this course, and the throwaway example of 20 big blinds not having a calling range, I kind of adopted it fairly immediately, and it wasn't as nuanced as it should be. I have changed my specific play on it based on where I'm at in the tournament, but I just decided as a blanket rule, I remember I took a sticky note, put it on the monitor, and said, if you have 20 big blinds and somebody raises and you want to play the hand, jam. That was it. And I stuck to that. And literally, I ended up final tabling the next day by doing that. And I kept that mantra all the way through the final table. I think I ended up in third, because I never really got any chips going, but I was able to stay in it at 20 big blinds even as the blinds went up, because I was stealing so often.
When you do get shallow stacked, hands like top pair are great. They are more than good enough to get all in on the flop, on the turn, on the river. You're usually pretty happy with top pair or better. And it's important to recognize that when you are playing shallow stack, you are frequently going to be at risk for all of your chips. A lot of people really hate the idea of being at risk for their tournament life. They hate the idea of going broke. But when you're sitting there with a 15 or 20 big blind stack, well, any hand you play is somewhat likely to take all of your chips, especially if you make something decent. And that is okay. The goal is to get a hold of chips, get a medium or a big stack, and then run over your opponents, which will allow you to take one of the top few prizes. The goal is not to hang around, knit it up, and wait for a very, very premium hand, because that's how you're going to blind out and collect minimum cashes but never ever make a deep run. So make sure you are very aware of the stack depth that you are playing, and we'll be discussing how to play poker based on stack sizes, because it's almost as if there are various games you are playing when you play a tournament. Sometimes you're playing the deep stacked game of No Limit Hold'em, sometimes you're playing medium stack games, sometimes you're playing shallow stacked, and sometimes you're playing very shallow stacked. And if you are not aware of the game you're playing and everyone else is, well, that's going to result in you losing tons of money to your opponents.
I remember explaining to a cash game player years ago when I was a dealer what it's like playing tournaments, because he never played tournaments, and I had actually just won some huge thing at the Venetian years ago. And he was a very good cash game player, and he said, I just kind of lose it. He's like, I don't really understand the concept when the blinds go up. And I go, well, imagine this. Imagine you're in a room full of cash game players and the doors are locked, and everybody starts out with a full buy-in, 100 big blinds. Nobody can leave until they're broke. Then the house increases the rake every level, right? So steadily the levels are going up, and steadily the house is taking away more and more and more money. So therefore your chips are worth more at a higher blind level than they were at the lower blind level, because you're getting raked off for $1 per hand at the lower level, whereas at the higher levels you're getting raked off $100 a level. And that was able to put the concept in his head of the urgency of tournaments and how you have to keep the pressure on. And me and that guy ended up going back and forth and talking quite a while, and we were friends for a bit while I was a dealer there. And eventually he came to the amazing realization that he was going to study tournaments and play them online, but he was going to stick with his live play because that's how he was making his living, and just stay the same. I haven't talked to him in like a decade, but every now and then I'll check his Hendon Mob or his IMDb or not IMDb, but his Hendon Mob or his poker database or his his Shark Scope, and he still doesn't have anything going on with tournaments. He's actually an online loser, which is hilarious to me because I know for a fact that he is a very good winning cash player and doing very well. He just can't get the concept. It's the same reason why I like tournaments, is because I enjoy the pressure of them. I enjoy thumbing my nose and saying I'm better than you. And in tournaments, that's what you get to do all the time, because you have to have such a wealth of knowledge at every different stack level. If you played cash games and you're a winning cash game player, you could just learn how to play a 100 big blind stack perfectly, and you could rise from 1-2 to 500, 1,000. You know, if you truly understood how to play that, you could just get rich immediately. The thing is, it takes a hell of a lot of knowledge to advance at that level. Sorry for the aside, but my phone's been going off all morning because everyone knows I've been a Raiders fan for years. How the fuck fast do you need to be traveling to kill someone by rear-ending them? Jesus Christ. He's getting charged with the GUI. Good, fuck him. I lost a close friend growing up to drunk. What happened? I didn't hear about this. Cops should show up on the scene. The administrator's a breathalyzer. Driver's drunk. Okay. Okay. Not how it works, Eric. I mean, honestly, as a funny side, it's not a funny side story, but kind of a tragic one. I had a friend in high school who got rear-ended at like 5 miles an hour in a parking lot, and it fucked up his neck to the point where he didn't walk for a year. It was really bad. So the speed of the accident really doesn't matter. Human bodies are very fragile. Just as an aside to that. He eventually recovered, but man, he was a football player and shit too. He was a really cool guy, Justin Bierman. I'll never forget him, but yeah, he was like in a neck brace, and eventually he started showing up to school in a wheelchair. And it was just because he could not put weight on his feet without his fucking neck feeling like it was going to pop out of his fucking skin. It was really, yeah, drunk drivers are the worst fucking people in the world. It's just unnecessary. There's actually a judge here in Vegas who typically will have the person who's committed a drunk driving offense in the court, and what he says is, let me see your phone. And he goes to the phone and he says, oh, you have Uber on your phone, and you have Lyft on your phone. Where were you? And then what he'll do is he'll put in the location they were and to their home, and go, that ride would have cost you $35. And then he'll go, we're going to add 2 zeros to that for every infraction. So the person gets fined like, $15,000. And he's doing it to make a point that there's no reason to drunk drive ever, but especially not now with Uber and Lyft. All right, let's get through the quiz here. To succeed in tournaments, you should focus most on your efforts on learning to play with deep stacks. False. You have to be very balanced. To succeed in tournaments, you need to understand how to play all stack sizes well. As stacks get shallower, you should play blank hands that require high implied odds. Fewer. That's what you want to play when the stacks are deeper. So, the correct answer is fewer. As stacks get shallower, pairs and big cards become more powerful hands to play. You're going to be more happy to just jam all in with 20 big blinds when you have pocket nines, than when you have, 100 big blinds. You know what I'm saying? It was rugs? What was rugs? I don't know. All right, let's go on to the next section.
Now let's discuss pre-flop bet sizing. And we're going to discuss from when you are deepest stack down to when you are the shallowest stack. So when you are very, very deep stacked, perhaps 150 big blinds deep or more, which is usually going to be the case early in a poker tournament, you're usually going to want to make about a pot size raise. And the way you figure out how much a pot size raise is you take 3 times the last bet, whatever it is, plus any additional money in the pot. And if you're out of position, you typically want to raise 1 last bet unit larger. So let's take a look at an example real quick. How much would a pot size raise be when you are facing 3 limpers?
Okay, what he's going to say is 3 times the last bet. So if there's 1 and 2, then it's 6 plus any additional money. There's 3 limpers. So 2, 2, and 2, that's 12. So a pot size bet is 24. The way I do it is, and this is the way poker dealers do it, if I was to call that bet and then count up everything I see and then add my money. So the raise is 6. I add 6, that's 12, plus the 3 limpers, that's another 6, that makes 18, plus that, so that amount plus my call. 18 plus my 6 is 24. Same deal. Do it either way you want. I will say, when you're doing it visually, it's faster as a poker dealer, and because of my dyslexia, I am a visual learner. So for me, adding up 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 times 3, it's stupid. Even when I was dealing pot limit Omaha, I actually saw the stack sizes in my head rather than doing the math. It's just, so whatever works for you.
Well, take a second, think about it. Fill in the blanks. It's going to be 3 times the last bet, which is one big blind, plus any additional money in the pot. In this case, there were 2 other limpers, right? We're raising 3 times the last limper, plus
the blinds and antes. I forgot that part.
The 2 other limpers. Here we have 1 big blind and 1 big blind, plus the blinds and the antes. So we have a small blind, a big blind, and an ante. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 1 is 5.5, or 5, plus 0.5 is 5.5, plus 1 is up to 7.5. So if there are 3 limpers, a pot size raise is 7.5 big blinds. If you wanted to raise 1 unit more because you're out of position in the small blind or the big blind, make it 8.5 big blinds. Okay, let's try another one. How much would a pot size raise be if someone raises to 4 big blinds and then someone else calls?
So there's a, we'll do it his way. 3 times 4 is 12, plus the call of 4, so that's 16, plus the small blind, big blind, and ante, 18.5.
Take a second, fill in the blanks, think about it. Well, it's going to be 3 times the last bet, which was 4, right? It's 4 big blind raise, 3 times 4, plus the 4 big blind call, plus the small blind, plus the big blind, plus the ante. This comes out to 18.5 big blinds. So when you're deep stacked, just use this equation. You can use this equation in any scenario. Off the top of my head, let's say there's a 3 big blind raise and then a re-raise to 10 big blinds.
So here's the way my way works. There's the raise, forget the times 3. There's the raise of 4 and the call. If I was to call, that puts 4 plus 4 plus 4, that's 12, plus 0.5, that's 12.5, plus 1, 13.5, plus 1, 14.5, plus the value of my call. Okay? Because you have to call first before you can raise. So that makes 4 plus 4 plus 4 plus 0.5 plus 1 plus 1 plus 4. 18.5. Same thing. 20.5. No. Out of position, if I'm doing this, if I'm on 100 big blind stack, yeah, the raise is going to be to something like probably even bigger. It's probably going to be like 21 or 22, just because I'm trying to make a big statement, right? So this is not one you're going to want to squeeze often with less than a hand that you're willing to go with if you're on anything less than like 60 big blinds. Like, because you can make it 20.5 on 80 big blinds and realistically fold when you get jammed for an effective stack of 100. You know what I'm saying? But if you have 60 big blinds and you make it 21 or 22, you've got a 30-year stack in there. If one of those openers rejams, you should be willing to get the money in. Anytime you're putting in a 30-year stack, you should probably just be willing to get the money in unless it's a pure move. And you have to have good specific information on these players and their tendencies. I thought it was 150 blinds deep. Yeah, 150 big blinds deep. Yeah, you would go, 20, 20 and a half, something like that. That would be fine, 150. I would probably go a little bit bigger. I mean, this is like first level of the tournament, so you really want to make a statement. Like, plus you're seeing an opening raise to 4 big blinds. That's only going to happen in the early stages. So pretty much everybody has 150 big blinds, right? So, yeah, I think I would probably even go a little bit bigger, maybe 22. But that's just at the micros. At bigger stakes, like buy-ins of $100 and maybe $200 and more online, I think you can just go the standard 20 and a half, and it's fine. Oh, I think, did I lose the camera? Yeah, I did. Hang on a sec here, guys. Lost the camera. What's up with that? I just heard it unplug. There it goes. Let's try it again. Why is that not working? Oh, wow. The camera's really screwing up. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's really screwing up. It actually went to my regular camera on my laptop, so you're seeing the other side of me. Hang on, let me just fix the setting really quick. Video, USB live camera. Okay, cool. All right, let's try it now. That looks like it worked. Did it work? I'm not seeing it. There it goes. All right, took a little minute. All right. So, yeah, let's go on from here.
Okay, and I want to make a pot size raise. Well, I do 3 times the last bet. Last bet was 10, right? Plus the 3 big blind initial raise, so that's 33. Plus the small blind, big blind, and ante, that's 35.5 big blinds if I wanted to make about a pot size raise. One thing you will see, though, is that as more money starts to go into the pot in relation to our stacks, what in the world just happened there? As more money goes in the pot in relation to our stacks, you should use smaller sizes. So in that scenario where it goes raise 3 bets, and then we want a 4 bet, we actually probably should make it a little bit less than the size of the pot. So as our stack starts to get shallower, you want to use smaller bet sizes. And I would...
Huge 4 blinds. Yeah, it is, but that's at the start of the tournament. You know what I'm saying? At the start of the tournament, you should be raising more. You get a 100 big blind stack, you're going to be raising 3 to 3.5 blinds to open, just because the stack sizes are bigger. If you make it 2 big blinds, well, everybody's going to call. That's just the way that works. So yeah, at the start of a tournament, you want to raise more.
Generally suggest that when you are playing tournaments, you're mostly going to want to use about a 2.75 big blind raise when you're playing deep-ish stacked, and that's going to be fine. When you're facing a limper, you're going to want to make about that pot size raise to about 4.5 big blinds. It's a little bit less than pot, actually, because we're essentially ignoring the ante to some extent. When you're facing a raise, you want to make it 3 times your opponent's raise, or their total bet size, when you are in position, about 4 times when you're out of position. And when you're facing a 3 bet, you want to make it about 2.75 times when you're in position and 3.25 times when you're out of position. You can go through this chart and read all of these. Definitely.
I think the only problem with going big is you really narrow the villain's range. That's the point. If you're talking about 3-betting in the early stages of a tournament, that is absolutely the point of 3-barreling, because you're not trying to... forgot how Twitch doesn't like long posts. Yeah, it kind of looks a little weird. Here's the thing. Let's say you're on a 100 big blind stack, right? And you have ace-king. And a player opens in the cutoff, you're in the hijack, or they're whatever. Yeah, they're in the hijack, you're in the cutoff, whatever. And they make a raise to 2.5 big blinds, right? And you have 100 big blinds deep. If you want to 3-bet that, you're absolutely doing this, and you're 3-betting to like 8 big blinds, maybe more. If you're in the small blind, you're going like 9, maybe 10. And you're right, you are narrowing the villain's range, but that's by design, because you have a hand that plays better as a pair than you do hands that are looking for straights, flushes, things like that. So when you have ace-king and you 3-bet and get called, and the flop comes off ace-4 deuce, and the player checks and you bet, and they call, you can be pretty sure you're in good position unless you're up against exactly 4s and deuces. You know what I'm saying? You're trying to narrow their range. You don't want them in there with those little pairs that may, fuck you up. Or like if the board comes off, ace, queen 10. You don't want this guy in there with queen jack. So that's exactly the reason why you're making that raise, is to protect those hands. And that's really the point of 3-betting when you're deep stacked, unless you're just going for pure steals. But deep stacked, you're not going to get a lot of pure steals because you are deep stacked. Everybody has a lot of chips. They will call more liberally with hands they like to flop. But if you're in late position, you can absolutely make steals and take pots away because of your positional advantage. And people are like, all right, I was just raising the queen 10 because I'm in position, but this guy made it 10 blinds. All right, I can easily fold. And then you just don't get into situations where he doesn't want a situation where he has reverse implied odds, and you don't want to be in a situation where you get your good hands cracked. So that's why I like raising with aces.
Print this out if you feel inclined, right? Make sure you are using good bet sizes. As you see, as we get shallower stacked, when we drop from 60 big blinds down to between 35 and 60, we're using a 2.5 big blind raise pre-flop, right? When we get even shallower, we're using a 2.25 big blind raise. And then when we're down to 12 to 22 big blinds, we're going to be using a 2 big blind raise size.
This is something that I don't do enough of, is adjust my bet sizing based on my stack, because mainly I go by the stage of the tournament. It works out roughly the same, but there are some nuance to it that I should change. Like being at 35 big blinds, I think raising to 2.25 would definitely be a smart move for me. I need to start doing that. That's one that little adjustment, because like I'm consistent in here, with these raises, and I'm consistent down here, but I think 35 to 22 I could dial it in a little more with the 2.25. Seems nominal, but it's really not, because you end up with perfect geometric betting when you go bet by leaving out the extra half blind. So
you also notice that when we're facing a raise or facing a 3-bet, we're going to start going all in with all of the hands that we are going to play as we get shallower stacked. And that's because if a raise would put in more than 30% of your stack, you should usually go all in instead. There may be a few corner cases to that where that does not apply, but for the most part, you're going to want to make it all in if you're putting in about 30% of your stack or more. Again, add 1 unit, whatever the last bet you're multiplying, for each additional caller. So let's take a look at one more example. From out of position, 30 big blinds deep, facing a 2.5 big blind raise and a caller. You'd make it 3.2 times, you see right here from the chart, the last bet, which was 2.5, plus the 2.5 caller. That's going to come out to about 10.5 big blinds. Since you only have 30 big blinds, though, and 10.5 big blinds is 33% of your stack or so, you're going to want to go all in. Okay? That's how you want to be thinking about that scenario.
That concept of getting 30% of your stack in, or a third your stack in, and deciding that that's no longer profitable and now it's just time to start jamming, it'll actually correct your range to GTO. Because, like he said, if you're putting in 11 big blinds of your 30 big blind stack and you get jammed on, are you folding? And if the answer to that is yes, you should never make that raise. Ever. Because you become super exploitable and players can just bang you off every hand and you lose a third of your stack. That's fucking ludicrous. So if you're going to make that raise and not fold, the question is, when do you actually make that raise? It's almost never. When do you make that raise? When you have aces or kings and want to get the money in. You know what I'm saying? But even hand as strong as ace king, just jam all the money in, because you're fine winning the pot pre-flop and you don't mind taking the race. That's when that philosophy comes in. So you'll see players with king queen suited in this case make a 3-bet, which is dumb in the first place, and then get jammed on and realize that they're screwed, when they should have just called the bet, played for smaller, and made a stronger hand, and then went with it. Because when you get jammed on with king queen pre-flop after you've 3-bet, you're probably not in awesome shape. At best you have a race, but a lot of times you're going to be dominated.
You're going to find that in general, when you have about 10 times an initial raise or less, or fewer chips, going all in is usually a reasonable option. And with more than 10 times the last bet, you're going to find that usually you want to re-raise to a smaller size.
So what he's saying, I'm sure he's going to explain it, but I talk it through so I make sure I don't miss any parts of this, so bear with it. If you have 30 blinds and a player makes it 3 big blinds, jamming is fine. Jamming is absolutely fine because of that 30% range that we're talking about. Especially if there's a call, then you're going to see a very common squeeze of 30 big blind jams versus an open for 2.5 and a call. Now if you 3-bet, it's kind of meh, you know what I'm saying? But if it's 30 blinds, you should just get it in. If it's a 3 big blind raise and a call, then you're just going to win it pre-flop way too often to make that unprofitable. And you can actually do that with hands like late versus late position openers from the small blind. You can do that a lot, and you win a lot of pots that way. And that's just the concept you want to keep in mind there.
Realize though, calling is still an option. You do not have to always re-raise. You do get to call sometimes. But as a general rule of thumb, let's say someone raises to 3 big blinds. If you have 30 big blinds or fewer, going all in is very reasonable. If you have more than 30 big blinds, then you probably want to re-raise to a smaller size, like, whatever the chart says here, right? If you have 18 big blinds, if someone raises the minimum in front of you, 2 big blinds, well, that's 9 times your opponent's raise, so going all in becomes reasonable. All right, so let's now discuss exploitative pre-flop bet sizing. This is very, very, very important. Against the strongest players, you want to use the same bet sizes in similar scenarios, which is, you can just follow that chart that I just showed you, and that's going to work out perfectly fine. However, against bad opponents, you need to adjust to maximally exploit whatever they do incorrectly. And usually, this is going to result in you raising larger with your best hands against people who are calling stations. A calling station is someone who calls a bet way too often. They just don't fold. So against players who just do not fold, you're going to want to raise larger with your best hands. Against people who will fold to big bets because they think you must have it if you put in a big bet, well, you're going to want to raise larger with your bluffs, right? So you want to figure out exactly what you are trying to get your opponent to do based on how you think they're going to react to each particular option that you could choose, and then choose that option. But again, that's not going to be what you want to do against good players, because good players are going to play well, pretty much no matter what you do, right? So against the good players, you're going to want to resort to playing fundamentally sound poker, but against the weaker players, who you have a very clear idea of what they're doing correctly, make sure you are adjusting to maximally exploit them, because that is where a lot of your profit is going to come from.
To answer your question, Cosero, good to see you too. I didn't cut my beard recently. I think it's just because I just woke up and the light's coming in from here and it's kind of washing out some of my beard, but I haven't cut it recently, no. But it is kind of matted down because I just woke up a little bit ago. It's an interesting concept too, what he's saying about exploiting players. Some players will always call some raises and never call others. Like if they open for minimum and you make it, 6 big blinds, they're always calling. If you make it 10 big blinds, they're never calling. They only have aces and they're jamming, or they're just folding. That's it. That being said, there are a lot of players who play way too tightly. This happened 2 days ago when I was playing, where there was a player 2 seats to my right, and it was later in the tournament, and I noticed the player had the ability to fold at less than 20 big blinds when he never should. So when we got later in the tournament, I started just banging raises on this guy every single time. There was a suited ace-4 of diamonds. There was a 9-5 offsuit from the small blind. There was I believe a jack-10 or jack-9 from the cutoff when he opened. And every single time he folded, and all I had to do was 3-bet big. So he made it minimum, and I would 3-bet at least 10 big blinds every time, and he would just fold the hand. And it was just absolutely perfect because it was like a pre-squeeze, because then the seats behind me were like, what the fuck is going on here? This guy raised, this guy re-raised. So nobody really caught on, and I didn't really run into a hand, and it took it down. Hey, what's up, McLovin? How you doing, my buddy boy? Good to see you, man. Cheers. Great to see all these people here today, man. I think it's going to be a play day today, but we're going to do the study session first. We're going to try to get through this whole 4-part section. So it's going pretty quickly, though. Let's do the pre-flop bet sizing quiz here. In position with a 100 big blind stack facing a raise of big blinds, you want a 3-bet. You should 3-bet too. Well, we're going to go by his system. 3 times the initial raise. 3 times 3 is 9, plus any additional money. Blinds and antes, 1.5. So that's 10.5. Since we're in position, we don't need to raise it. So wait a minute. Hang on a sec here. Why can't I figure out a pot size bet the way he says it? So it's 3 times plus the additional money. So it's 9. 3 bet in position. So there's no blinds and antes here. So my call would be 3 plus what I see, 7.5 for the blinds and antes. Sorry, 8.5 plus my raise, 11.5. So it's 12. 9. Wait a minute. Correct answer is 9. When you are playing a deep stack in position, that's his deep stack philosophy. Deep stack in position, you should usually bet 3 times the size of previous raise. Okay, so we're not going pot size bet because we're deep stack. That's the part that I missed. Let's see here. Out of position, very different. With a big blind, with a 100 big blind stack, I got to remember that part. Facing a raise to 3 big blinds. If you want to 3-bet, you should 3-bet. I'm not looking at the answers here. Out of position, so you're going to go 3 times the last raise plus what you see, right? Because you're out of position, but it should only be 3 times. So an extra betting unit 12, because you're going 3 times the blind plus an additional unit, 3 big blinds. So that's 12 total. I'm not counting the blinds and antes because I don't think we're supposed to because we're so deep stacked. All right, now I got it. How am I? I'm really good, my man. We are, what is this, our 51st day of streaming full time and doing these streams every morning. Haven't missed one yet. And probably got about a good 30 plays or sessions of play in addition to that. So we're putting in a lot of time. Also, the YouTube's doing well, getting new subscribers all the time. I appreciate that. If you guys haven't followed it yet, ! YouTube. Go ahead and check it out. I do edited hands in entertaining ways called Jedi Mind Tricks. All the final tables are there. Fun stuff, clips from the stream. Just, interesting things that aren't full VODs. But I do have all the VODs of the Wake Up With Me's because that's kind of like it's the most informative. It's a lot of hand reviews and it's classes like this. In position with 60 big blinds. Facing 3 limpers. If you want to raise, you should raise to around, well, since I am a visual learner, I'm going to bring up the calculator. So we're in position, facing 3 limpers, if you want to raise. So your initial raise, well, I guess I don't need the calculator. Your initial raise is going to be 3 times the last bet, plus any additional money. So 3 times 1 is 3, plus any additional money. There's 2 additional limpers. That's 5. So your raise should be around 5 big blinds, but you're in position. That doesn't seem like enough. Well, I guess it is. Yeah. No. Okay. 7. Hang on. What am I doing wrong here? The correct. See, this is the kind of thing I can do in game, but when you give it to me in a word problem, it fucks me up. Pot size raise would be 3 times the last bet plus the remaining money in the pot. Okay, now he's got the blinds and antes in there because we're at 60 big blinds, not 100 big blinds. All right, that makes sense. So I didn't add the blinds and antes. Duh. In position with 60 big blinds, facing a raise to 3 big blinds and a 3-bet to 10 big blinds. If you want a 4-bet, you should, well, I can tell you off the top of my head, this is probably all in. But we're going to do the math to justify the all in. The 3-bet is the 10 big blinds. So the last bet is 10 big blinds. If we go triple that, plus any additional money, the 3 big blind initial raise, plus the blinds and antes, equals 34.5 would be a pot size bet. We have 60 big blinds. That is more than 1/3 of our stack, so we're just going to jam it all in here because raising to 35 big blinds, having 25 behind is ridiculous. There you go. Correct answer is all in stack depth. You 4-bet around 2.75. Okay, I went 3. It should have been 2.75. See, that's the nuance I don't have. Since 2.75 is more than 30% of your 60 big blind stack, you should just go all in instead. All right, cool. We got the right answer, but it was a little off. Out of position. Here's a good one. With a facing a raise of 3 big blinds. If you want to 3-bet, you should 3-bet too. So we're out of position, so we'll say small blind and the cutoff opened, right? Or the button, whatever. So the initial raise is 3 big blinds. 3 times that would be 9. plus an extra unit because we're out of position would be 12, plus the additional money in the pot, 13.5, more than a third of our stack. So again, it's an all-in. There you go. If you are facing a limper who you expect to call any reasonable raise and then play straightforwardly on the flop, instead of raising to your default size, you should raise to a larger size because they're going to call anyway. So you might as well get more money in the pot now. That's my philosophy. Maybe I'm not getting the point of the question. Right. Larger size. Against limpers who play straightforwardly, you want to raise to a larger size to isolate them. In addition, you will build a bigger pot, which you will frequently win with a continuation bet. Yeah, you're in position. You got the last one. The 3x is a jam, yes. That's the thing. We're saying they're going to call and play straightforwardly. That means that, you know, if we just jam whatever, they're not just going to call that. But instead of making it, you know, 4 big blinds because he limped, we can make it 6 or 7. That way we make sure everybody else folds and we get the spot in the pot with us and get to play, you know, for more versus a weak player. All right, so screwed up those first two. It's early for math in my head. We'll go on to the next section.
Now let's discuss pre-flop range composition. It's important to realize that you can build your ranges in various ways to take advantage of whatever your specific opponent does incorrectly. So, before the flop, you are usually going to have either a linear range, a polarized range, or a condensed range. So let's go through these one by one. A linear range is comprised of the best hands as well as hands that are strong but, you know, not quite premium. So let's take a look at this range we have right here. This presumes someone raises before us, and then it is our turn, okay? In this scenario, this particular player is going to 3-bet for value with pocket 10s and better, ace queen suited and better, and ace king offsuit. Then they're going to 3-bet for lesser value, which, you know, it's still good hands, with pocket 7s to pocket 9s, ace jack suited, ace 10 suited, ace queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit. You can see them, the hands in blue. And then this player...
You can think of 3-betting for hands with lesser value. You can kind of shorthand that in your head of hands you will 3-bet but fold to a 4-bet jam.
Is going to call with the hands in green. These are hands that are, you know, playable but certainly not strong enough to re-raise purely for value. So, when would you want to use a linear range? Well, a linear range is ideal whenever everyone just folds to you, right? If everyone folds to you initially and you want to raise, you should just raise with the best hands. That makes logical sense, and we'll be giving you pre-flop charts to let you know exactly which hands you should be raising in an upcoming section of this masterclass. A linear re-raising range, like we have right here, is ideal when you think your opponent, the initial raiser, is going to call you with a wide range.
So you're saying small blind versus under the gun. No, not exactly. I mean, this chart can be applied a lot of different ways, but in the small blind, your values change much differently. And your small blind range versus under the gun, I understand why you're getting there, but it's not this. Because if somebody raised from under the gun and you're in the small blind with king, queen suited, you are almost never going to 3-bet that for value. But if you were on the cutoff and a player opened from the hijack, you would most definitely 3-bet with king, queen suited based on stack depth, obviously. Like if you both had 50 blinds or something, because your hand has enough value to do that. And then when it folds back to him and he jams, well, then obviously you're folding it. But when he calls, you're in really great shape. The under the gun player who raises has a much stronger range than anybody else on the table. And this is, remember, this is going by a GTO range because that's the standard that we've set. So under the gun, they're only going to be raising their best hands. Nobody's speculating under the gun who's playing well. So would you go polar versus under the gun? Versus under the gun, a linear range can work because of your positional advantage, but not from the small blind. So from the button, this can work very well. And it works very well for stealing. So under the gun, if I'm on the button with these hands, then yeah, I can see 3-betting the king queen suited or the king jack suited or the ace jack suited, ace 10 suited, ace queen off, all those hands, simply because that player knows that I see him under the gun raising into 8 players. You know what I'm saying? He knows I can see that. He also knows that I will have position on him the entire hand. So therefore, my range should be stronger than it is. But because of my positional advantage, I can actually widen it a little bit. See, I go polar versus button because button is opening polar. That's not always true either. True, the button does open their best and worst hands, but depending on the... See, here's the thing. There should be no hard and fast rules. Even when I was explaining my button versus under the gun, opening and 3-betting range, I even said it can be a good way to do it because there are no answers. You have to remember, it's everything you learn in poker is pretty much a philosophy. That's why you'll see 2 poker players who are at a high level of play come up with completely different answers to what to do in a situation while talking to each other, and then they'll both end the sentence with, but I can see in your, what you're saying. You know what I'm saying? There's no answer. This is definitively better. Definitely also player dependent. Yeah, player dependent, stack dependent, stage of the tournament, how big the buy-in is, how big the prize pool is there ICM pressure? You know what I'm saying? All these things kind of feed into it. And don't worry, it's a large topic, but I can honestly say that this course, as we go through it, you will get a better feel for how those things work based on the things that you can see and have absolute information on, like the stage of the tournament, the ICM pressure, the hand values, your stack size. Those things you have complete knowledge of. Then you have to fill in the blanks of the things you have incomplete knowledge of, like your player's exact hand. So you use ranges, you use pot odds, you use things like that.
Of marginal hands. For example, if someone raises and you re-raise with a hand like ace-jack offsuit, like we have here in blue for lesser value, this is a great hand to re-raise if your opponent is going to call you with hands like ace-4 offsuit and jack-7 suited, right? Because you are going to have them in very bad shape. So if your opponent is what's referred to as a calling station, if they're just going to call every bet you make before the flop to try to see if the flop gives them a good hand, you usually want to use a linear re-raising range. Okay? Notice here that the problem with a linear re-raising range is that what does it do to your calling range? Well, it turns out all these hands in green are actually pretty weak. So if you're playing in a very aggressive table, you really don't want to use a linear strategy for your re-raising range because it leaves your calling range very marginal. Because if someone raises, you call with one of these hands in green, and then one of your aggressive opponents behind you re-raises, you pretty much need to fold most of these hands in green, which is not really what you want to do. You don't want to be calling pre-flop raises, then folding before the flop and not getting to see the flop. So you're going to find that linear ranges are particularly strong against weak players who are kind of oblivious to what you are doing. This is like very basic poker against very bad players. But as you move up to higher stakes games, or even medium stakes games against people who are anywhere near decent, you're going to find that this linear strategy starts to lose a lot of its merit. Unless, of course, your opponents call a ton.
You're going to see things like players adopting a linear range in a lot of tournaments right near the bubble, and especially on the final table bubble. Totally not the thing to do, but it is going to be a very common factor. People call too much in those situations versus 3-betting. So you're going to be fighting this range on a lot of bubbles, and just understand that, and that's why you should be 3-betting more. It also means that when there's more ICM pressure, you should be 3-betting more as well. Demographics play a role as well if you play internationally. Very true. You guys will hear me all the time. If a player makes an aggressive action, usually one of the first words out of my mouth playing on America's Card Room is, "Are you from Brazil?" And then I scroll over them, and 80% of the time they're from Brazil. And I'm like, I said it not because they just 3-bet me, but because Brazil generally, as a country and a poker culture, tend to be more aggressive and more blindly aggressive than others. But if I scroll over that same player and I see that it's a German, well, I give the raise a lot more deference because they actually understand the true ranges that I'm opening with. The Germans seem to be very calculated in their moves and all like that. it used to be the Swiss, you know what I'm saying, starting with the guys, trying to everybody play like Isildur, you know what I'm saying, where they were the most blindly aggressive guys in the world. Now South America has the lock on that, I think, internationally. As a poker player, almost any question and the first words you're most likely to hear are, "It depends." That's true. I do that all the time myself. It's great when you're table captain near the bubble. The amount of chips you can pick up is unreal. Yeah, that's something that I always keep in mind. I believe it was Daniel Negreanu telling the story, and this is back in early 2000s, maybe late 90s, where it was the summer that Phil Ivey won, like, whatever it was, fucking 5 bracelets or something like that. And people are huddling around watching that, and Negreanu's playing other tournaments, so he's not seeing what's going on there. And a friend of his comes over, I forget who it was, it's another famous poker player from you'd know from TV, but he comes over and he goes, "Hey Daniel, how you doing?" And Daniel says, "Pretty good, this, that, and the other, blah blah." He says, "What's going on over there?" And he looks over at the other table, and the other poker player says, "Oh, Phil Ivey's raising every hand." They were on the bubble, and he's literally raising every hand, to the point where it was pretty easy to tell that he wasn't even looking at his cards. Like, he was just kind of fake looking at them and opening based on his position and his stack every time. And when they say every time, they mean every time. That's a good lesson to keep in mind. Now people have gotten much more sophisticated since then, so you can't do it quite that much, but it can still be done. Idea for extra segment, poker history with you. I do know a lot of poker history. It's just because it's just been something that's always been there my whole life. I've always been a fan of it too, and I've read so many books and stories, and it's crazy.
So you're going to find that usually you're going to want to instead use what is referred to as a polarized range. So a polarized range, when you are re-raising, is comprised of the best hands that don't mind if you get 4 bets, which is re-raised, as well as hands that are not quite good enough to call. So let's take a look at this strategy. Notice here we're actually playing the same composition of hands.
I will say this is mostly what I use, is the polarized range. Just because hands like King Queen suited, most of the time you don't want to 3-bet it, right? Or King Jack suited, right? Something in there. Most of the time you don't want to 3-bet it because the hand plays so well post flop. You know what I'm saying? Your pairs can be good a lot, but also you have all the straight draws, all the flush draws. It's fantastic. But you can see King Jack offsuit actually gets 3-bet as a bluff, because now you have blockers in your hand. It's far less likely for your opponent to have jacks or ace king or ace jack, all those hands. So when you 3-bet, because of what you're removing from the deck by what you see in your hand, you're going to bluff this king jack more than you are the king jack suited and get the folds more. And it means that when you get 4-bet, you fold. But if you get a call or a fold, that's great, because now you're in position. You're going to c-bet the flop. You're going to take it down a lot. You can use, some general idea of flop texture, things like that. It just makes it better. Queen Jack suited is another example, but Queen Jack offsuit, you're 3-betting. So it's really a fun concept, and I think it's the most. I think I veer to this most often because to me it is the most engaging and interesting way to play, and poker's kind of boring. So you have to make it fun, and I think this not only has the best results for me personally, fits my personality type, but it also makes it most fun for me, because knowing little things like, ooh, I'm calling with King Queen suited, but I'm going to 3-bet with King Queen off, you know what I'm saying? Shit like that.
Hands. Notice we're folding 84.6% of hands on the linear range and the polarized range. We see they're actually comprised differently. So now notice what we are doing. We are still 3-betting the same hands for value, right? Pocket tens and better, and ace queen suited and better, and ace king. But now we are calling these hands in green, which all flop very well. And notice if we do call with these hands in green and someone behind us 3-bets us when they re-raise us, we can actually now continue with the vast majority of these hands. And now, instead of calling with these hands in blue like we were doing in the linear range, we're actually using these essentially as a bluff, because these hands are probably barely good enough to call or not quite. So what happens is when someone raises and we call, we have a pretty decent range, these hands in green. And when we re-raise them, we have either a really good hand in red or a marginal hand in blue that we can easily fold if they 4-bet us. And you're going to find that this strategy is quite strong against just generally good, decent players. And it's also quite powerful because it's going to keep your opponents guessing. Whenever you do just call someone's raise, they know you have something pretty good, but if they know you have something pretty good but not premium, they don't know if they need to be trying to bluff you a lot after the flop. And when you re-raise them before the flop, they are not going to know if you have a really good hand that you're not folding or a bluff. So let me just show that to you, make it a little bit more clear. This is our re-raising range that we are using, and sometimes we have the absolute nuts, sometimes we have some kind of marginal bluffs, and that will keep your opponent guessing. And it's great to keep your opponent guessing because when they are guessing, they make mistakes. So this is a polarized range where you are re-raising your best hands for value and then some hands that are perhaps not quite good enough as bluffs.
There's a great example here that I don't know if you guys remember it from the, this is another poker history thing for you. I think I would rather use 7-6 over 8-9 suited. I mean, you can always make adjustments, but you have to understand that these charts are developed by programs like Munker Solver and things like that. And this is just a general chart. This isn't accounting for stack size. This isn't accounting for position. This is a general thing. He didn't even tell us what position we're in. Okay, all I can tell you is we have position. So this could be a button range versus a low jack open, I would guess, at like 40 big blinds or so. You know what I'm saying? But this is not a 20 big blind from, the low jack facing an under the gun raise. And you're going to see the charts get that specific as we go through this. And it seems like a lot, but you practice it in game, and I'll show you how to do that at the time. It's very easy to get the charts for all stack sizes and all positions. It's easy to get them down, and at one point I had them all, I took screenshots of every single one, and I was like, on 70 big blinds, I have this, and all these different stack sizes, meaning 80, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 25, 15, 12, and 10. And I had every range from every position for every one of those stack sizes. And I counted them up. It's something like 140 charts that you have to know individually, but there's tricks to be able to learn them. You just go, well, what's the dividing line? Is it, if it's 10 jack suited, is the dividing line on raising versus calling? Well, then all you have to do is remember 10 jack suited. And if you have a hand that's better than that, raise. You know what I'm saying? It's a very shorthand way to do it. So it seems overwhelming, but it gets easier. But the one I wanted to talk about was there was a thing where Phil Hellmuth played Tom Dwan heads up. I believe it was the 08 or 07 heads up poker challenge. And the one on NBC that's played at Caesars. And Hellmuth has aces and Dwan has tens, right? And they're about 50 big blinds deep. Dwan opens, or Hellmuth opens, Dwan raises, Phil re-raises, Dwan jams all in with the pocket tens. Hellmuth calls it, does his big, I got him. And then Dwan's just sitting there like rolling his eyes and going, all right, whatever. And Dwan hits the 10, and he was like, I was going to say nice hand, but you're being such a jerk about it that just whatever, man. And they got into this whole thing, and that's where that animosity started. And Dwan made a very interesting point. He said before the cards were finished being dealt, they were on the turn, and Hellmuth is already bitching because he's got the 10 against him. Dwan looks at him and goes, it's standard. What are you talking about? And he's like, it's standard heads up to get it in for 50 big blinds, pre-flop. You're out of your fucking mind. And Hellmuth was wrong. Looking back, it was completely reasonable for him to do that. And you can see the polarized betting structure of I'm 3-betting these hands and not folding. So when Dwan gets 4-bet, he just jams and that's it. It's over. Because there's no point in folding this hand because you can't call it, but obviously it's too good to fold. You remember that? Yeah. At the end of it, they interviewed Hellmuth, and there was some chick interviewing him, and he's just like, she's like, what do you think? And he's like, I tell you, these kids. And Dwan's walking by in the background, and he just goes, pwned! And he just keeps fucking walking. It was really funny. How you doing, baby? You awake now? Mm-hmm. Yeah, having fun? I do have fun listening to you. Yeah. Speaking of poker history, I remember some players at the Red Rock telling poker story about something that happened at a WPT final table. Don't remember which situation it was, but he got the details wrong. Like a fisherman describing the size of a fish he caught, and when I tried to correct him, he said, and why are you lying? Next, you're going to say that you were there. And I was like, I was my reply, which made the dealer chuckle because he knew what I used to do. Yeah, Eric was a reporter for Poker News. It was Poker News, right? Yeah. So Eric was at every fucking event and knows all that shit. He's a really wealth of knowledge. He's a fun guy to talk to. And that also reminds me of my favorite fishing joke of all time. Did you hear about the one-armed fisherman? He caught a fish this big. Just got the eye roll from Courtney. It is a stupid joke. My uncle told me that joke. I think that was Uncle Irving. Let's see here. All right, so we're going to keep going. So that's why I like the polarized range.
If let's say you think these hands in blue are good enough to call, so they would all essentially become green as well, you would then find some weaker hands to 3-bet as a bluff. Maybe ace-8 suited, ace-6 suited, king-9 suited, queen-9 suited. Basically, hands that are on the cusp of playability are usually the best ones to bluff with. So that's a polarized range. Now let's discuss a condensed range. So notice this is the exact same range as before. The condensed range is the hands in green. These are hands that are not premium, but are also not weak. And you're usually going to have a condensed range when someone raises and you just call, assuming you think that they are competent. And also when you raise, someone 3-bets you and you just call. Because if you had your best hands, you would 4-bet, right? And if you had garbage, you would fold. So that means whenever you raise and someone 3-bets you and you just call, you usually don't have the absolute nuts, but you have something pretty decent. And you're usually going to find that people who call and don't re-raise are usually condensed to some extent. So this is generally what a condensed range looks like. It's just pretty strong hands, but it does not include the absolute best hands.
The thing about a condensed range is that between condensed and polarized are very close. It's just a difference. The percentages are the same of what percentage of hands you do something with, but the actual hands themselves are different because you're doing it for different purposes. In a polarized range, you're doing more 3-betting to bluff than you are in a condensed range, whereas in a condensed range, you're trying to make stronger hands versus, certain players. Now, I will say a polarized range works great versus the general populace, but versus a very stupidly aggressive opponent, I will go to a condensed range fairly quickly because they're just going to be firing chips at me. And when I have the definitive range advantage versus them, meaning their range is the deck, it's usually better just to let them blast off. That's why you'll see hands like, you'll see me say things like, well, you never want to get in 50 big blinds with top pair, on the river. But there are times when that's what you should do because you're playing against one of these maniacs. Happens usually early in tournaments. Again, a lot of South Americans you can use this against. It's one of those things that happen. So bad players will use those. Let's see here. It was not Poker News. Although they used to steal your content. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember we talked about that. Yeah, it wasn't Poker News. I forget which one it was. But I remember we talked about Poker News scooping your shit. Let's see. Super YouTube. It would be good YouTube content. So bad players will confuse those two. Yes. Bad players will confuse the polarized range with a condensed range. It is a slight difference, but the difference is the specific hands. Like the queen king suited being a call here, the queen jack suited being a call here is true in both of them, but there is no 3-bet for the king jack offsuit. You know what I'm saying? The king jack offsuit is just, it becomes a fold because of, you're not 3-betting specific instances. Meanwhile, the ace-9 suited becomes a 3-bet in a condensed range or in a polarized range, whereas in a condensed range, it's not even a call. But hands like 9-10 suited are just calls in a polarized range versus being a 3-bet in a condensed range. So there's little differences that make big changes to the overall range, and you can even fluctuate what you're doing hand to hand based on who you're playing with. Like if certain players raise, I'm going to use a polarized range most of the time. But if other players range, it's going to be a condensed range because, like I said, there's maniacs that'll just blast off. So you kind of don't want to scare them out of the pot when you're already isolating them.
So that is the linear range where you just have all of your best hands and slightly weaker hands for value. We have the
linear. a straight line, linear line. Your best hands for value, and that's it.
Polarized range, which you're 3-betting with the best hands and some bluffs. And then this condensed range is when you are calling with a lot of marginal, but still decent hands.
The 3-betting range on the polar is more like the calling range on the condensed. Think of it that way.
And you're going to find that, like I said, in general, using a linear 3-betting strategy and a strong condensed calling range against good players is usually ideal. Not always, but usually. And we will discuss when.
So people who see a hand falling in both ranges will be super confused about it. Right. That's the thing. They don't know exactly what you're doing. And here's the thing you have to remember in poker all the time. Nobody knows what you have. Nobody really knows what you have. They have a range, they have tendency, they have general populace, and especially online, there's not a lot of players. Like, I play with thousands of players a week. There's only maybe 100 or so that I recognize on average and go, oh yeah, I know this guy. And I know what they're doing. And even if two players that have the same exact HUD numbers, I don't even need to see the names, but once I look at my notes on them, I go, oh, yeah, I know this guy. And then I can respond to both of them completely differently. But for the most part, you're talking about generalities. So if you use these things, you won't be so easy to pin down to a specific hand.
And you should adjust based on the position, the stack sizes, your opponents, etc. throughout this masterclass. Before we leave this section, let's also discuss the idea of capped versus uncapped ranges. Usually, well, the player with fewer nut hands is said to be capped, and the player with more nut hands is said to be uncapped. For example,
let me break that down because I didn't get that concept when I first heard it. Capped means you can only have so much, and the lid is on the jar. It's capped. So if somebody raises and you re-raise and they 4-bet and you 5-bet and the flop comes off whatever and you jam all in, you have capped your range at one pair, meaning aces, kings, queens, things like that. That's one pair capped. If a player raises and you call and the flop comes out whatever, your range is now uncapped. You can have anything that's reasonable to call there. So this board could have helped you or could completely have whiffed. But you do have the nut advantage because when a flop comes out 7-5-4, if somebody raised under the gun and you called on the button, comes out 7-5-4, you can have all the sets, you can have all the straights, you can have all the flush draws, straight draws, you can have all the hands. You can even have overpairs that aren't great, like 9s, 10s, 8s, things like that. You can even have underpairs, deuces, you know what I'm saying? You can have everything. Your range is uncapped. There is no cap on the jar. That's the way to think about it. Let's see. I'll go to that in a second. Let's finish this little section and do the quiz.
let's say you raise from under the gun and the big blind calls. Right here before the flop, under the gun is uncapped because they have pocket aces, kings, queens, ace, king in their range. Whereas the big blind is capped because they don't have aces, kings, queens, and ace, king in the range because they would have re-raised. And this term also applies to the flop, right? Let's say under the gun player raises and the big blind calls and it comes 6-6-5. Well, that's a scenario where if the big blind checks and the under the gun player bets and the big blind raises, at this point, the big blind is essentially uncapped because if you think about it, the early position raiser probably doesn't have a whole lot of sixes in their range. I mean, take a look at this range right here that we are using for perhaps a standard early position strategy maybe. If you're playing all these hands that are selected, notice no hands really contain a 6. So on a hand like 6-6-5, or on a board like 6-6-5, if you do bet and get check raised, now, even though you have hands like aces and kings and queens in your range, you are still essentially capped at, well, exactly aces, and the player in the big blind would then be uncapped because they have a bunch of sixes in their range that they're going to call your initial raise with. So, basically,
now that becomes powerful because on a board of 6-6-5, the player can have all the sixes, but they can also have 4-3. They can also have 5-5. They can also have ace-5. They can also have 7-8. They can also have all flush draws. They can have 7-4. They can have all these hands that defended in the big blind. So therefore, when they check raise, they can either have you crushed or they can have a draw with a lot of equity. And that's what you're going to want to do is raise with your best made hands and your draws. Because your marginal made hands are going to look to get the showdown with, but when your range is uncapped, You can threaten somebody with aces now just by your lack of position, because you have the deck versus those aces, and nobody likes getting their aces cracked for big money. That's, the old saying used to be, aces are great, but you either win a small pot or lose a big one. Not always, not really true anymore since we've learned a lot more about poker, but that used to be the case because that was a capped range.
Basically, whoever has more nut hands in their range is said to be uncapped, and obviously we'd rather be uncapped than capped, but that's not always a scenario you will be in. So those are two terms that you need to be familiar with as well, and we will be using those later throughout this masterclass.
Let's do the quiz. Your range should be condensed when you 3-bet a razor in position, you 3-bet a razor out of position, you raise, someone 3-bets, and you call. That's it. Your range contains more calls in a condensed range. Your range typically is condensed when you are calling raises. This is because you would typically 4-bet your strongest hands. In a condensed range, you're 4-betting your strongest hands, and then meaning that these are not in your calling range. So you don't have aces in your calling range in a condensed range. Now, in a linear range, there is an argument for calling sometimes with just the aces. Let me see here. People hand falling in both wrists. Tom Dwan was in the biggest pot I ever saw in my life. There was literally stacks of pumpkins in the middle worth, best as I could figure out, was worth $3 million. Yeah. Ended up losing the pot, which ended the session. Dwan simply got up, walked out. No one could tell from just looking at him that he had just lost 5 houses. Yeah, man. I personally, I've dealt hands where I've pushed $1 million pots in cash games, and the player losing or the player winning, they look like somebody just asked them how they were doing, and they were just like, I'm fine. Like, it's really crazy. I spent months, if not years, using Flopzilla to review hands, practicing narrowing down ranges street by street. A good thing to get for a idea of ranges, and I do love Flopzilla, but I find using Equilab works better, because you can then figure the flops versus range versus your range, and it's just something that translates better for the way I learn. But yeah, I like doing that too, and I'll still play around with Flopzilla and Equilab just when I'm bored. Like, if I don't want to play any more Hearthstone and I don't want to play poker and I don't want to edit, I'll sit there dicking around with Equilab and just be like, well, if I had this, what would I do? Blah, 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 blah. You know what I'm saying? And go down a rabbit hole. Was that versus Ivy in the straight, and both of them had the big game? That was a yeah, that wasn't a televised game, I'm sure, yeah. How do you fake a capped range then? You don't have to fake a capped range. Raising makes your range capped. So if you wanted to fake a capped range, I guess you would 3-bet more. So and I guess that's kind of what you're doing when somebody raises and you re-raise, and you don't have a good hand. You're kind of faking that you have a capped range, meaning a good pair. You know what I'm saying? Meaning aces or kings. I guess that's initially what you're doing. It usually doesn't get to the bluffing aspect of that until you get to 5-bet. So if a player raises and you 3-bet and they 4-bet, then you 5-bet, now you kind of just look like you have aces or kings. So then it comes down to what they have. You'll see that in, deep cash games a lot. Right, the one I saw was a Party Poker Big Game. Yeah, I remember that one. Ivy had the wheel, and the 4 came off and made the 6-eye straight for Dwan. Yeah, I remember that. I have the Power Ecolab as well. Nice. When I say that I saw the hand, I'm not talking about it on TV. I'm talking about it in real life. Yeah, Eric was there. I'm thinking faking a cap range would be just doing a lot of calling. No. When you call, your range is uncapped. You're getting it backwards. Okay? Here's the scenario. Capped means you can't have a lot of hands. Okay? So if you raise, okay, and somebody calls, their range is uncapped. Your range isn't quite yet, but it is usually capped. Okay? Because you're representing a good hand. So we're narrowing your range. Now, where it gets to, if your range is one pair, calling will never represent that. So if somebody raises out of first position and you call on the button, who's more likely is the question to have a tighter range? Well, it's the guy under the gun because he's raising into 8 players. When you call on the button, you can have anything, right? So that means that, you can have all the great hands, all the shit hands, all the anything. You just really can't have hands like aces, you know what I'm saying, or kings. But you take only those 2 out, and everything else you can have. I mean, honestly, even queens or jacks 3-bets from the button. So I guess maybe you can remove those, but this is how you kind of decide what is your opponent's realistic range. Now, if a player raised from under the gun and you 3-bet and he 4-bets and you call, well, now his range is pretty capped at 1 good pair, and your range is still uncapped. So you can still have hands like king queen suited. You can still have hands like any suited ace. You can still have hands like every pair. You know what I'm saying? So your range is still uncapped. The guy who calls is less capped than the guy who raises. I think faking a cap range would be doing well, would be doing just like calling. No. If you raise, you're uncapped, but if you call, you're now capped to mediocre hands. No, that's not true. It's not true. You're thinking about it backwards. Right. Because of the ranges just explained. Exactly. You have to start with the ranges and go from there. If you are re-raising, you got to think about it in extremes. If you don't know who gets capped, go to the next raise. If under the gun raises and you re-raise from the button and he 4-bets from under the gun and you 5-bet from the button and he 6-bets from under the gun, who's the most likely guy to have aces? The guy under the gun. Even kings is not going to put in that 6-bet unless they're just going to jam. We're talking about like a stack that's 300 big blinds deep, right? Now, that's where an interesting situation comes in where you may call with aces pre-flop, but very rare. But if the player under the gun opens and you just call from the blind, yes, both your ranges are wide and nobody's capped yet, but when the flop comes off ace, 5, 4, and the initial raiser bets, he's kind of capping his hand at 1 pair. He's saying, I have ace, king, ace, queen, ace, jack, something like that. When you raise on the button on that ace, 5, 4 flop, after getting c-bet at and just calling pre-flop, well, now what can you have? You can have ace, king, or ace, queen, sure, I guess, but you can also have pocket 5s for a set, pocket 4s for a set. You can have deuce tray if it's suited. You can have 2 pair, 5, 4, ace 5, ace 4. All those hands are available to you because those are all hands that would not 3-bet pre-flop, but would call a raise and now would raise the flop. So your range is uncapped, meaning you have more nut hands than the under the gun player who most likely just has an ace. Say you open under the gun and you flat on the button, you're now capped as you don't have any of the strong hands. Capped is not that wide of a term. Capped means 1 pair. So, true, your range doesn't include aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s. True, but it does contain ace 10 suited. It does contain ace jack offsuit. It does contain all the Broadway cards. It does contain all the pairs lower than probably 10s or 9s. It does contain all the suited connectors. It does contain all the unsuited connectors based on the player pool. You know what I'm saying? So your range is uncapped because you can have so much more than the other guy raising can. You know what I'm saying? You're only taking out a small percentage of hands by not 3-betting. By not 3-betting, you're only taking out the best hands. So, you see what I'm saying? Just FYI, poker players usually have a hard enough of a time to understand what they do correctly in a situation, let alone trying to fake it. True. Besides, your first priority is to tell a believable story, very true, in a hand that's hard enough to do when you're playing face-up poker. Yeah, here's the other thing. The only reason why you would ever fake a capped range would be if you were intending some very complicated bluff. And 2 things about that. Anything that's very complicated in poker probably isn't going to work for 2 very important reasons. One, it's too fucking complicated. People aren't going to see it the way you see it. They're just going to be reacting to their own information, which are your cards, your hand, your stack, your position, your opponent's perceived range. Those are the things they're reacting to. They're not reacting to, well, this guy is, 6 foot tall, blonde haired dude from Calabasas, California. This morning he had an egg salad sandwich, and he's probably a little bit gassy, so he might want to 4-bet so he can get to the bathroom break quicker. So in that situation, he probably has an uncapped range. People don't fucking think that way. And besides, when it is that complicated, it doesn't work because it's not that deep. Poker has to be simple and broad. It has to be a lot of room for the other player to make a mistake. And you have to keep your moves simple. If they're simple, everybody can see it. When you go out and walk across the street, if you look left and look right and see a car coming, you don't step out on the street. Simple concept. You don't want to get hurt. If you raise and somebody 3-bets and you have a shitty hand, you probably fold for the same reason. You don't want to get hurt, and there's danger approaching. So I say a flop like ace-8 deuce under the gun could just blast off. The button doesn't have the nuts because he's capped. No, again, you're backwards. If the under the gun opens and the flop comes off ace-8 deuce, under the gun can just blast off. No, under the gun can c-bet, representing that ace. But understand, when the under the gun player bets, he's now representing that he has an ace in his hand, ace king or ace queen. That is what he's doing. When the button calls, who is more likely to have more than one pair? The button. The button's more likely, if they both have hands that they like, the button's hand is doing better because the buttons contains ace-8, all the aces suited, ace-8, ace-deuce, pocket deuces, pocket 8s. He can have 3-4. You might want to take a card off, see if he can bluff you. His positional advantage allows for that. But when we're talking about just value of hands, here's another way to look at it. The under the gun player opens. You're on the button. You just call it with ace-jack. Suited, because you don't want to 3-bet it because you want to see the flop. The flop comes off ace-8 deuce. The under the gun player bets. Are you raising? No. Why aren't you raising? Because your hand is not good enough to raise. So you call. The turn comes off and it's another deuce. And the under the gun player bets 2/3 pot. You have no flush draw. You still just have ace-jack. You're 30 big blinds left. You're on the bubble. Or not on the bubble. Fuck it. You only have 30 big blinds left. But it's a freeze out. Are you calling? You kind of have to decide then and there if you're going to call the river. So you're probably going to have to fold, right? Because under the gun's range is one pair. And every time the under the gun has one pair, he has the ace. And every time he has the ace, most of the time, because his range isn't going to include ace-10, most of the time you're going to lose. Because he's just going to have ace-queen and ace-king, and you're just going to take it in the shitter. You know what I'm saying? So does under the gun, the only thing under the gun doesn't have is deuce-deuce? Yeah, typically. Now, if the under the gun player is super stacked up or it's near the start of the tournament, yeah, they can have deuce-deuce. But other than that, they typically don't have deuces. But they can have ace-deuce. A smart player will open all suited aces under the gun except for ace-6. So they can have ace-deuce, sure. The player in position has a much wider range because he has more information to work with in the hand. Very true. They've seen who raises first. If you're on the button, you get to see everything that happens first before you act. You have the most information. This is half of the positional advantage. The other half is you get to be last to act. So you get to change the action when it gets to you in the last position. Let's see. Under the gun c-bet, haha, my ace hit, but meh, let's see if it's enough. Call. Right. Yeah, the under the gun c-bet. Right, now you're sitting there with the ace-jack like, shit. I do agree with what you're saying. I'm just trying to understand capped versus uncapped. Capped means your range is so narrow, it can only be a few hands. Uncapped means you can have everything, right? That's what it means. If you call pre-flop, if you call okay, think of it this way. Player raises. You call pre-flop. Okay, the player under the gun raises. What's his range look like? You can figure it out, right? You can figure it out. You can go aces, kings, queens, jacks, tens, good suited aces, ace 10, ace jack, ace queen, things like that. Good offsuit aces, ace queen off, things like that. King queen suited, sure. King queen offsuit, sure. All those hands. You can decide his range. What does he know about your range on the button just calling? He knows you don't have aces, kings, and queens, probably jacks. He knows you don't have ace, king. Cool. Doesn't really know much else. So your range is much wider than his. So when the flop comes off, jack 9-4, who's going to have more nut hands? Who's going to have more pairs of jacks, nines, fours, straight draws, two pairs, jack 9, sets of fours, sets of nines, things like that. Who's going to have more of that? The guy who didn't raise. You know what I'm saying? Now, if I had 3-bet the button pre-flop, it narrows my range because we know the hands that I'm going to 3-bet versus an under the gun open. And then it goes back to under the gun and he just calls. Well, now he's uncapped because my range has to be stronger. So now, fuck. And not only that, he can have the whole deck. He can have aces and be trapping me. You know what I'm saying? Granted, I can have aces and be 3-betting, but he can have aces and be trapping me, kings and be trapping me. He can have pairs. He can have, any suited ace, all like that. So the guy who makes the call is usually uncapped. You know what I'm saying? Then you go by how the board comes out. So if the board comes out with an ace and somebody bets, that guy's saying, I have an ace. And that means he's capped. You know what I'm saying? Now, granted, sometimes they're going to bet with a set, but we're talking about generally. The person with the capped range is usually the aggressor. They're saying, I have that. And when you say, I have that, it means you can't have all of this. So there's a cap on your jar. You see what I'm saying? Let's see. Love today's lesson. So much learning. Complicated stuff made so simple. That's the whole key. And this is why I think it's as fun to go through with somebody like me because of my dyslexia. I have to make these concepts simple in my own head to understand them and apply them in game. So I find that people kind of get it easier because I'm breaking down complex concepts into digestible content much the same way Jonathan Little does with this course. This is high-level shit that I think anybody could learn. I really do. I would narrow it down to mid-pocket pairs. You're getting too specific. But right, that range is narrowed, but it's still very wide. You know what I'm saying? So would narrow it down to mid-pocket pairs, suited connectors, broadways, some ace-X. You're talking about narrowing it down to about 40% of the deck. So, it's a wide range, therefore uncapped. You know what I'm saying? Sure, you can't have 7 deuce offsuit. Okay, but you can have a lot of other shit. You know what I'm saying? So then your range would be uncapped. I'd say if you can feasibly have 30% or more of the deck in your hand based on your action, you're uncapped. Yeah, very educational today. Yeah, this is the stuff that makes poker players go nuts. But it's the philosophy, and once you get the philosophy down, you can apply it very well. You know what I'm saying? And just generally to poker. So we break it down away from the table so that when we get there, we're not sitting there going, my range is your brain just goes, he's capped. Okay, I'm uncapped. I can bluff now. I have more nut advantage on this hand. I can bluff. You know what I'm saying? Because now I can make a guy fold one pair very easily because in position, I just called. I can have all the sets, all the trips, all the straights, all the whatever. That's when bluffing becomes a huge factor, and it's why position is so important. All right, next question. Your range should be polarized when you 3-bet from in position. All right. You 3-bet a raiser from out of position. All right. You raise someone, 3-bets, and you call. You 3-bet a raiser in position. Because here's the thing. I'm just going to read it. When you're in position, you can call raises more frequently. So, when you 3-bet a polarized range, that includes your best hands that don't mind getting 4-bet, as well as the hands that are not quite good enough to call. Perfect example that I love of this is being on the button with King Queen offsuit. if somebody opens from the low jack and we're at 50 blinds effective, right? They open from the low jack and I have king queen suited on the button. I'm going to call because my hand is so strong. I want to see the flop all like that. Cool. If I 3-bet, if I have king queen, I'm 3-betting because now my hand is strong, but only when one pair is good. So if a player makes it 3 big blinds, I make it 9 big blinds, it goes back to him and he calls, and a king or a queen is top pair on the board, and he checks and I bet, I most likely like this scenario quite a lot. Now, if he raises, different story. But if he just calls, I'm going to continue betting until he either A, gives me a reason to not bet, meaning raises, or folds. I guess that's a reason not to bet because the hand's over. Or I get all the money in. You see what I'm saying? That's what we're looking for. When you reduce the stack to pot ratio, a single pair becomes stronger because it's more likely to win when a smaller stack to pot ratio exists. So when you 3-bet a raiser from out of position, that's more of a linear range. Because if you're in the small blind, you need a stronger hand, right? To raise reasonably, right? You know, let's say you're, you know, under the gun raises and you're in the big blind. When you 3-bet that scenario, you're being linear. You're going to have aces, kings, queens, ace, king suited, ace, king offsuit, and ace, queen suited. That's kind of it. Like, you're probably just calling with jacks there. You know what I'm saying? Because your hand has to be so much stronger because you know the under the gun player's range is so much stronger. So you need a range that fights well against that. And what is the range that fights well against that? It's not fucking jack 10. It's fucking aces. And when you raise and someone 3-bets and you call, that would be the condensed range. You know what I'm saying? That's where you're making more calls pre-flop. So this is a good question that illustrates all 3 types of bets, and each one is different. And you can see the percentages people got on these, right? Most people, when they answered this, they said 37% was when you 3-bet a raiser from out of position. That's a linear range. So 37% got it wrong. Yeah, see, now you get it, right? Dude just got moved to the table with a monster stack. Averages 12K. He had 70K. Within an orbit, he now has less than average. I got mine. Yeah, and that's because Eric sees this fish coming. Sometimes the spot can have a lot of chips, right? But if you apply these betting positions, especially these ranges and betting styles appropriately, you'll just destroy people who don't know what the fuck they're doing. See, your 3-bet range should be linear when you expect your opponent to 4-bet or fold. You expect your opponent to call often. I hate questions like this because it confuses itself in my head because of the learning disability. So you want to be linear with your 3-bet range when you expect your opponent to 4-bet or fold. Yeah. Nope, I got it wrong. When you expect your opponent to call your 3-bet more frequently, you want a 3-bet linear. Okay, yeah. Okay, now that makes sense. Because if they're going to call more frequently, you want to raise your better hands more frequently against them because you want the card advantage versus a loose player. Okay, this was just a weird way to phrase it. If you said versus a loose player, you know, you want a 3-bet with what kind of range, I would say linear because you want a deck advantage versus a loose player. Okay. Your 3-bet range should be polarized when you expect your opponent to 4-bet or fold. You expect your opponent to call or fold. I think this is more the 4-bet or fold because we're 3-betting with more of a bluffing range when we're polarized. Yeah. I just hate the word problems, man. Like this comes down to my reading. Don't let my mistakes fuck you up. I get the concept and I make sure I go back through it if I get the question wrong, but this just comes down to the way my dyslexia works if I fuck these up. So I kind of have to talk these out. So I know it gets annoying, but it's just what I need to do to learn. When you expect your opponent to 4-bet more frequently, you want to call the original raise with hands that do not want to get 4-bet, leading you to have a more polarized range. So when would you expect your opponent to 4-bet or fold? Well, when you have your best hands and your marginal hands that aren't good enough to call with. That king-jack offsuit, right? You're on the button, hijack opens, you're going to 3-bet with the king-jack offsuit because you have good removal. If he 4-bets, you just fold, right? But then again, if you have aces and he 4-bets, well, now you can get it in. You know what I'm saying? So that's the deal. The best and the worst. Polarized. All right, we're going to mark this complete. I think there's one more section here. Just going to try to get through it.
Position matters. In games where a player gets to act last, like poker, well, you'd rather be the one who acts last for a few reasons that actually significantly impact the way a hand plays out. Position gives you information about what your opponents are doing, and it also gives you control. For example, if you are in position, you get to see if your opponents bet before you or if they check. Typically, people bet with their best hands, they check with their not so good hands, right? That is nice, good information to have. You may say, what if my opponent flips that on its head? Well, that's fine. You'll figure that out and you'll adjust accordingly, right? Position also gives you control. If you get to act last, you get to figure out if you put in one more raise or re-raise, right? Which allows you to bloat the size of the pot when you feel inclined, when you want to make that happen, right? So, because position is so relevant, you get to play wider ranges when you are in position. You get to play more hands. And that is quite powerful, right? It's good to know. One of the biggest mistakes a lot of recreational players make is they just play the same range of hands, or roughly the same range of hands, from all positions. And that's a big mistake, because you should actually play much, much tighter from early positions than you should from late positions, as we will see in the very, very next section of this masterclass. One spot worth mentioning is playing from the blinds, because when you're in the blinds, you get to act last before the flop, which, may seem very, very good. However, you then have the worst position after the flop. You have to go first. And having to go first after the flop is detrimental. So you're going to find that, especially from the small blind, you have to play quite tightly. A lot of people think, don't I need to defend my small blind? Well, the answer is just no, as we will see in the next section of this masterclass. So recognize that you get to play wider ranges as you get in later positions. So from the button and the cutoff, you're going to get to play way more hands than from early position. And you're going to find that post-flop position matters as well, but we'll discuss that when we get there.
I remember Jen Harmon did the Limit Hold'em section of Super System 2, and I was reading it in 2005 when it came out. I had pre-ordered it, and she talked about her ranges then. And people didn't really discuss range too much back then, but she said, without saying the word range, she was describing it. And I remember she said, now, when I get to the cutoff or the button, now we get to have some fun. I just remember her saying that in the book and thinking, holy shit, she's right. I can do a lot from there because I have the positional advantage. So that's how I learned the concept. In 2011, some people said, since position is powerful, you can therefore exploit it. Does this still hold true in the past and now? Yeah. Position will always be the killer. Stu Unger talked about position in the 80s, saying that if you gave him position on somebody, they're not going to win. And he was right. Phil Ivey in the late 90s, early 2000s had a famous quote where he said, my grandmother could beat me in position if I gave it to her all day long. It's that powerful. It's still true. It's still the thing. We talk about it constantly. And you're going to see as this course goes on how position changes your opening ranges, your continuing ranges, what board textures are good for you versus your opponent, your stack size, how it's in relation to your stack in position plays bigger than out of position. If you're in the small blind with 20 blinds, your stack plays significantly shallower than if you're on the button, okay? If somebody raises and you have 30 blinds on the button and the cutoff open, or the hijack opens, let's say, or the cutoff, doesn't matter, and you 3-bet from the button and they have 60 blinds, your stack, while it doesn't threaten their stack any more than 50%, it plays bigger because you have such an advantage post-flop. So your stack plays like 45 or 50 blinds because it is so much more threatening, because they know they're going to lose the hand a greater percentage of the time because they're going to have to fold. It's not about showdown. It's about who can make who fold in that scenario. And when you're in position, you have all the chances in the world to make people fold more so than they have it against you. Good luck, good decisions. Just the hole's nice. Okay, guys, back to the grind. I'll be back later for the grind. Yeah, I'm going to probably play today, probably sometime around 3:30 or so. I'm kind of 50-50 on it at the moment. I want to do some editing, but I feel like I want to play today. So hopefully around 3:30, I'll get into it. Maybe 4 at the latest. If not, just check the stream title. I'll update that, and you guys will know what's going on. All right. So that's the all for position. He just wanted to tell you position's important. You asked the question. This section is 2 minutes long. It's just an introduction to how good position is. And it's just saying position gives you informational control. You get to play wider ranges from the blinds. You're last to act before them, but you're the worst position post-flop, so it's awful. We're going to mark this complete. And we've completed this section. Woohoo! We're through the second section. So let's go back to the course. This is now our 6th session working through this, and we are 4% complete. So kind of a long way to go. If we expand this, we see that it's all, 100% complete. Oh, why is this... we can mark it as complete here. So we mark the course as complete. All right. Now we can go back to courses. I want to make sure that it says 100%. I didn't know how to update it before. I think you have to mark the section complete. Yeah, there you go. Now it's totally checked off, and when we expand it, we see all 4 topics 100% complete. Cool. All right, so I got to remember to do that. Click the little circle and mark the whole section as complete. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take a break. I got to do some preparation for the day. I'm not 100% if I'm going to play. I probably am. But I will say I do have some things to do. So I don't know. If I don't play today, then definitely tomorrow. If I don't play today, then definitely tomorrow at noon. We're going to go through the next section, which is pre-flop more than 60 big blinds. That last section, talking about all stack sizes and getting us a general idea, took about 2 hours to get through. Hour and 45 minutes. This section with 60 big blinds has 9 topics in it, so this is going to get super dense, and you're going to see 35, 22, 35, 12, all this shit. Thank you for this section in any case. Cool, Quasar. Much appreciated, man. Yeah, thanks for the thank yous. Those actually keep me very motivated. It does take a lot more effort and make it go slower that I do this on stream, but you know what? It keeps me accountable and makes me go through it, so happy to do it. I'll see you guys later. And have a great night. And don't forget to check out the YouTube. New content coming the next day or two. See you later. If not later today, then tomorrow.